In a large wheat field, a farmer called Waco was busy scything the crops. A fellow native calls him over and heads to a small wheat hut. He tells Waco that Penn's life had been taken up to G12 because of disobeying the new orders from above. Waco wasn't interested in all the new rules that the uppers have implemented for the past few weeks, and he wasn't having any of it. He strolls out to the cornfield and starts shouting his head off with rants and dissatisfaction. Then he looked around. He can hear the scuttling amongst the crops. He sees what it is and starts swinging his scythe around. He gets killed and the creature moves away. A claw then emerges from the sky and takes Waco's body up. Never saw again. The doctor was filling the TARDIS's record shelves alphabetically. Some turbulent trips through the vortex caused the shelves to buckle and flung the records onto the floor. There was no damage to any of them, but the arrangements were in disarray. He was busy arranging the ones that began with the letter G until Louisa calls him over to the console. He looked at the scanner. Wheat fields? He checked again. They weren't on Earth but still in space, and wondered if the TARDIS scanner was randomly showing stock footage of landscape. It's not the first time it has happening. The circuits do falter from time to time. The two went out and looked outside. Wheat fields? It felt humid and both stepped out. Louisa thought they were somewhere similar to Canopus 3. The doctor thought maybe primitive farm planets, quite common in multiple systems. Then he looked at the sky. A matte color blue with patches of white to resemble clouds and some lettering printed. G12. Louisa came across the wheat hut and got startled by a native farmer. It asks how she got her. Then the doctor comes over and asks about the sky. The farmer called Leet says it's their existence. It's how they were brought up generation to generation. The doctor was a bit confused by this. Then repeated his question to Leet, and what does G12 mean? Leet backs away and decided to change the subject. The doctor figured that Leet was living in fear of something. Then he noticed that behind the wheat hut is that the world had just finished. It was painted on a wall and he touched it. It was made of metal and he turned around to look at this place. A big metal dome with a wheat field in the middle of it and small random wheat huts scattered around. Louisa asked him if it's linked sections of a big spaceship or populated colony. The doctor wasn't sure and turned his attention to Leet. Leet was shaking and was performing hand signs of worship. The doctor wanted to know what was going on in this place. Leet panicked, saying the ones above G12 will take him if he doesn't obey the rules. The doctor integrated him about these rules. How many are there, 123 or 562? Leet raced out of the wheat hut in fear and into the wheat field. He spread his arms out and shouted rants to the metal sky. Louisa then heard a slithering sound from the crops. The doctor also noticed and then witnessed a giant earthworm digest Leet's head, sucking it whole, leaving the neck stump and the remaining body to drop to the ground. Suddenly a second one appeared out of nowhere, destroying the wheat hut with its slimy features. Both them fled and the doctor entered the wheat field. The doctor then saw a metal claw come down from a hatch from the top of the dome. It was going for the body of Leet. He shouted Louisa. He had a plan. To get on the claw and see what's up at the top. Louisa raced away from the destroyed wheat hut and headed to him. The two giant worms were slithering around to make a counterattack. She grabbed onto the doctor and the claw started to go up, carrying Leet's body. The two giant worms jumped to attack them but ended up smacking themselves into the claw and lured themselves back in the wheat fields. She asked him what about the TARDIS? He said he'll find a way to retrieve it, but at the moment he wants to know the truth about this place. The metal claw stops into a hatch. The doctor, still holding onto it, looks around. Metallic industrialist structure with blue lighting and a strong smell of chemicals. He and Louisa dropped down. She asked him if the whole thing is a ship. He kept observing where they are and wondered maybe. Then claw lifted up and went in a east direction, still carrying the body of Leet. The doctor said they need to follow it. Louisa thought that chasing stolen dead bodies was the norm for him but agreed to it and followed him. They reach a sliding metal door. He used the sonic screwdriver to open it as it used keypads, and the doctor would have been for hours to find the right 4-digit code. When they went in, they approached a gantry where what seemed to be a hosting farm was taking place. More of those giant worms were slithering around corpses and implanting themselves into them. Louisa felt disgusted by this. The doctor looked on. What were they? A dying alien race trying to survive via hosts? Suddenly both of them got a taser shock to their backs and fell to the metal floor. The doctor later awoke on a hard, uncomfortable chair. He was strapped and couldn't wriggle out it. A group of small humanoids, Well, gray-skinned dwarfs in a pale gray uniforms approached him and questioned him for sneaking on board their craft. The doctor asked about the inhabitants down below and why are there large alien worms all around. The leader states that they call themselves the researchers and those alien worms are called Clavorians. The Clavorians are a carnivorous race from an unknown planet, but the information and knowledge of them over the years infatuated the researchers to catch them to conduct experiments. The doctor asked about the ones down below. The researchers' leader revealed that the inhabitants were found in a cryo-sleep freighter and were originally from the planet Earth. The doctor wondered to himself. He had encounters with humans who fled the planet because of the invaders as they called them, and the cryo-sleep freighter was another opportunity to flee, but by looking at this situation sadly not. The researchers' leader then presented a collage of screens showing other factions of humans living in different zones, and then the doctor's eyes widened at the sight of Louisa. He retorted to them that they've created an ant farm on the edge of a feeding frenzy and tried to forcefully pull himself out of the chair. No luck. The researchers then brought a small metal cabinet near him and presented small drills. They were going to lobotomize him, knowing he wasn't human and wanted to experiment on his biology. Louisa meanwhile was laying on a bed covered in silk sheets and woke up. A duo of handmaidens came to her and said she'll need to be ready for the highness. Louisa looked confused. Had she ended up in a fairy tale or was she in a coma due to being tasered? She proceeds to get ready with the assistance of the handmaidens and headed to a large dining table. At the other end of the table was a young prince. Louisa gave a closer look at him. He was Indian with black rounded spectacles and looked like he was 15, maybe 16. The prince was named Dilip. He then held her hand and kissed it. Louisa wasn't sure what to do and Prince Dilip said she's his bride-to-be. Her eyes glazed in shock but uttered a friendly response because she didn't know what to say and somehow agreed to it. A little later the ceremony began. Louisa wore a berry red embroidery dress and the mention of vows came into her ears. Suddenly a crashing sound was heard from the ceiling and the doctor caved in from the ceiling and said he objects the two from getting married. He climbed down using loose wires from the ceiling and apologized for the interruption, but he translated his speech from Hindi to Bengali to Punjabi. The guests, even Prince Dilip, shouted at him saying they known the English language very well and thought the doctor was impersonating their ethnicities. The doctor just scratched the back of his head in sort of embarrassment and Louisa just rolled her eyes. She then noticed he was covered in scars like something had slashed him. He said he had to deal with the ones on the upper decks and wanted to examine him in the most gruesome ways possible. Then the researchers' leader busted into the hall. He was also battered after an attack, but his head was partly severed and when he moved around it swung quite unstably. Quite a gruesome sight. The doctor pointed to the researchers' leader stating that these upper deck leaders have been committing genocide on these humans only for scientific research and that this place and others around it are just cattle pens for the Clavorians. Louisa said what? He said to her about those giant alien worms they encountered and what Leet was roughly consumed by. The doctor walked up the researcher's leader. It just stood and then started spitting black fluid out of its mouth. The doctor gave a stern stare at it. Aliens with cybernetic augmentations place inside those dwarf bodies and watched it fall flat on its back. Dead. The doctor reached in his pocket and brought the Statenheim remote control. He says to the crowd that he's taking them somewhere where they can live their lives and that they're the only ones still alive. The other ones in the different zones are all dead and he wants to make things right. Save humanity from alien interference.